big call to be calling in the troops to Victoria to help with this potential second wave. Is this a bit of grandstanding from the government trying to put pressure on Daniel Andrews about all those lockdowns?
Well, I think each state premier needs to stand and explain why they're doing things, whether they're doing border closures or whatever they're doing in their own jurisdictions. And I think it's quite unedifying for there to be squabbling between politicians when you've just seen 6,000 people lose their jobs at Qantas. So, I mean, I'll leave it up to the Premier of Victoria to justify what he's seeking to do.
We will get to that Qantas story in a moment because that is big news this morning. But just on that Victorian wave, Labor MP Anika Wells, Greg Hunt has said that those Black Lives Matter rallies sent the wrong message about those restrictions that led to a lot of people ignoring them because why stay home if you see 10,000 people go into the city? You chose to attend a Black Lives Matter rally. Do you still stand by that decision?
Well, the Black Lives Matter rally in Brisbane had 30,000 protesters, and 2.5 weeks on, it's been confirmed by both the CMO, Brendan Murphy, and our Health Minister up here that there were no cases arising out of that. And I think in a modern, rich country such as ourselves, we should be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We can practice social distancing at the same time as we fight systemic racism. That's what we did in Brisbane, and now 2.5 weeks on, that's what the evidence demonstrates.
So why continue to have restrictions in Queensland? Why keep the border up if you can have thousands of people go to the city for a protest? Why continue to restrict businesses, restrict people's home lives?
If anything, I think the events of the past couple of weeks demonstrate that Premier Palaszczuk was correct to set out her roadmap and to stick to it, despite political pressure from Liberals across the country seeking to make political opportunity out of her upcoming state election. A few weeks back, we were being told that borders should open because business was under pressure. Now, with the cases mounting in Victoria, people are saying borders should remain closed. The ADF coming in, more should be done. If anything, it demonstrates that she has had good judgment, and sticking to it throughout all of these changes has been the right thing to do.
So just on this though, Anika Wells, how do you defend going to a rally when it is against the law? It's a gazetted public health order at the same time that you come to Parliament and pass laws that you expect Australians to respect.
What's gazetted by the Palaszczuk government is what's directed by the Premier, and what both the Premier and our Deputy Chief Medical Health Officer said to us as Queenslanders the day before the rallies was that if you go, you need to practice social distancing. So that's what we did, and 2.5 weeks on, evidentially, that is what people did because there was not a single case arising out of those protests. Now, I take my job as a representative of 110,000 people really seriously. It wasn't a decision that my family and I made lightly. Obviously, I'm in a vulnerable category myself. But my job is to listen to particularly the vulnerable and the disenfranchised in my community and to amplify those voices. And that is what I was doing by going to the rally and listening to the most vulnerable, the most disenfranchised, plead with their government to do better. And if anything, this scrutiny shouldn't be falling upon the people, the ordinary Australians who care enough about such an important issue to act. The scrutiny should be on the government that have had 7 years to do something and have failed to do so. If Scott Morrison wanted to avoid the protests 2.5 weeks back now, he had every opportunity to do so in the days leading up to the protest. They were well signalled. He could have announced measures that would have given people some confidence that he understood the gravity of the situation and would act. He didn't do that. In fact, what he said was, well, it's a free country for 5G protesters. Those are mixed messages, Annalise, not the messages of the protesters.
Those 5G protests generally had about 20 people attending them. Senator Andrew Bragg, do you think it sends a mixed message for members of Parliament to be attending these mass gatherings when they are against public health orders?
I think there is a very clear need to separate the issues from the law. Now, everyone should comply with the law. There is no excuse for breaching Australian law, whether you are exercised about a particular issue. I mean, the virus has no accent. And so, as we've seen in recent days in Victoria, where people have been marking the end of Ramadan, there have been community transmissions there. We all have to respect the virus as equals, as we are in the Australian society. So if people want to raise particular issues, I personally am a supporter of Indigenous Australians and their agenda for structural reform, but I've chosen to advance that agenda in an appropriate way, which doesn't breach the law.
If we can turn to that big Qantas news, 6,000 jobs is going to have a huge impact across the country. Andrew Bragg, should the government be coming in with a bailout package for Qantas or extending JobKeeper, as was flagged by Alan Joyce?
6,000 people is an enormous amount of people to have lost their jobs. I know that Anika will also feel strongly about this. It really is a human face on what has been a dreadful year. Now, people who work for Qantas do a whole range of jobs, so this will hit different people across the income spectrum from all walks of life. The JobKeeper scheme has been very successful because it put in place a wage subsidy across the economy. It's obviously worked quite well in sectors like aviation, where there's been additional packages required as well. And as we've seen overnight, we have performed very well on a global comparative basis. So from here, I mean, the judgments I think that the executive will be making is what are the sectors that require more assistance once JobKeeper is due to end. And as we've seen today with the arts sector receiving a package, aviation could equally receive another package if there are still government restrictions in place which are affecting the aviation sector.
Anika Wells, should the government be extending JobKeeper for Qantas employees?
Yes, this is a devastating day for aviation families, and from bean to cup, the government has stuffed this one up. They have let Virgin Australia fall into liquidation. They have deliberately acted to exclude some aviation workers from JobKeeper altogether, and now they are too late to save thousands of jobs, 6,000 jobs at Qantas. And it is not like they were not warned. People have been jumping up and down, pleading with them to act for aviation workers and the broader aviation industry for months. I wrote to the Infrastructure Minister and DPM 3 months ago, pleading with him on behalf of my aviation workers to act, to do more, like you say, to extend JobKeeper. It took 3 months for a response, and that response said, we're doing plenty. Clearly not. The evidence today is that clearly more needs to be done. And like you say, we just heard from Alan Joyce that he's been speaking to the PM and the Treasurer. I want to know this morning what the government plans to do to help aviation families.